Episode 1. The Shadow Contract. London, November 1848. A grimy drizzle, born of the eternal smog, fell on the streets of Cheapside, doing little to wash away the soot and the stench. In a room that smelled of damp paper, cheap ink, and despair, Elias Vine's pen scratched across a page, the sound a desperate counterpoint to the ticking of a single, stubborn clock. He was a copyist, a human printing press with a memory that forgot nothing, a curse as much as a gift. The legal document before him was a tangle of whereas and heretofores, a dry account of a disputed inheritance. But within its lines, Elias saw a pattern, a repeated, seemingly accidental blot that formed the shape of a tiny, crude anchor. He noted it, as he noted everything, and continued his work. The door to the outer office opened with a sigh. Mrs. Gable, the perpetually flustered landlady of the tenement he called home, stood wringing her hands. "Mr. Vine, sir," he insists. "He's downstairs." No name was needed. The rent collector, Mr. Shrike, a man built like a brick and with a heart to match, was a force of nature as regular and unpleasant as the Thames fog. Elias descended into the cramped, foul-smelling courtyard. Shrike waited, a ledger under his arm. 2 weeks, Vine. Or it's the street. And the crate goes first. He nodded toward the single window of Elias's room, behind which sat his only treasure, a crate of books left by his father, a failed schoolmaster. The world narrowed to that threat. "I will have it." By week's end, Elias heard himself say, the promise hollow even to his own ears. "You'll have it by tomorrow sunset, or I'll burn those papers for kindling myself," Shrike spat, turning on his heel. Panic, cold and sharp, coiled in Elias's gut. He walked, aimless, through the labyrinth of alleys, the sounds of the city, the hawkers, the clatter of carts, the distant wail of a beggar's song, a blur. His feet carried him instinctively to the one place that offered a mirage of order, the reading room of the British Museum. Here, amid the silent, soaring shelves, he could breathe. He reached for a volume of Defoe, a temporary escape. As he opened the book, a slip of parchment, crisp and foreign, fluttered to the floor. Not a bookmark, but a note. In a precise, elegant hand, it read, "A mind that sees the anchor in the ink is a mind wasted on copying the lies of solicitors. A task of discretion and memory awaits. Inquire at Wheeler and Company, Threadneedle Walk, after dusk. Ask for the ledger of the Midnight Phoenix. Fail to come, and your debt to Shrike will be the least of your concerns." Elias's blood turned to ice. The anchor. He had seen it only hours before, in the privacy of his garret, on a document no one else had laid eyes on.
How?
He looked around the vast, silent hall. 100 readers, heads bowed, anonymous. A gentleman in a dark coat turning a corner. A whisper of movement. Nothing more. That evening, with a knot of dread and wild, inexplicable hope in his chest, Elias found Threadneedle Walk. The building was narrow, squeezed between two larger establishments, its windows black and uninviting. The door opened before he could knock. The room inside was a paradox. It was opulently furnished, deep carpets, rich mahogany, but utterly devoid of life or personal touch. A single lamp on a vast desk illuminated a pile of ledgers, but left the corners of the room in profound shadow. Behind the desk sat a man, or the suggestion of one. Mr. Wheeler's face was obscured by the high wing of his chair and the careful fall of shadow. Only his hands were visible, long-fingered and pale, resting on the desktop like two sleeping spiders. "Mr. Vine," a voice said. It was soft, dry, like the rustle of silk against parchment. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You have the note." and you're in need of employment. A specific employment.
Who are you?
How did you know? The how is irrelevant. The what is this? One pale hand slid a small, leather-bound journal across the desk. It was old, its cover stained. This is the private diary of the late Sir Alfred Fairhaven. It is written in a personal cipher. I require a transcription. A faithful, complete transcription of its decoded contents. You have a gift, Mr. Vine. The gift of indelible recall. You will look at the code, you will break it, and you will remember the key. You will then transcribe the contents for me. You will speak of this to no one. In return, the hand gestured and a small, heavy purse landed softly beside the journal. This will settle your account with the estimable Mr. Shrike. And another, equal sum, upon delivery of the transcription. Elias stared at the purse. It represented months of rent, food, survival. It represented safety for his father's books. But the journal seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Why me? A professional cryptographer. Would ask questions. Would make copies. Would talk. You, Mr. Vine, are uniquely qualified by your talent and your circumstances. You are a ghost in the machinery of this city, perfect for a ghostly task. The logic was irrefutable, chilling. Elias thought of Shrike's threat, of the cold street. He thought of the mysterious anchor, a warning that this man knew his most private observations. He was already entangled. He took the journal and the purse. The leather of the diary felt strangely warm, almost alive. 1 week, Mr. Vine. The silken voice whispered from the shadows. Do not disappoint me. Back in his garret, the door bolted. Elias lit his single tallow candle. He opened the journal. The pages were filled not with words, but with a bizarre, intricate dance of symbols, musical notes, alchemical signs, constellations, and tiny, exquisite drawings of birds. It was madness. But as Elias stared, his mind, that relentless engine, began to work. He saw repetitions. He saw patterns in the birds, a raven always before a symbol for Mercury, a lark paired with a rising sun. It was a language, a hidden language. He worked through the night, oblivious to the cold. As dawn tinged the sky gray, he had it. The key was not a simple substitution, but a context-based cipher where the meaning of a symbol changed based on the image preceding it. The midnight phoenix from the note was not a ship, but a concept within the code, a cycle of destruction and renewal. With trembling fingers, he decoded the first full entry. The neat, translated words that flowed from his pen were more terrifying than any cipher. March 23, 1845. The transaction is complete. The child is secured in St. Agnes's, a blossom among thorns. Montague believes it a charitable act, the fool. He sees a ward. I see an investment. The Phoenix Fund is established. When the bird rises from the legal ashes, the fortune will have a new, obedient heir. Let the girl dream of a legacy. She holds only the empty title. The substance is mine. The anchor holds all fast. Elias stopped, his breath catching. St. Agnes's. A foundling hospital. A girl. An heir. A stolen fortune. And the anchor. The same symbol from the legal document. He was no longer just breaking a code. He was reading a confession to a monstrous crime. And Mr. Wheeler, the man in the shadows, had just paid him to uncover it. Episode 2. The Whispering Walls of St. Agnes's. The decoded entry burned in Elias's mind. He was a conspirator now, an unwilling archaeologist unearthing a venomous secret. The child at St. Agnes's Foundling Hospital. Was she alive? A pawn in a game of inheritance? The weight of the knowledge was a physical thing, a stone in his chest. For 3 days, he moved like a ghost through his routine, copying mundane legal texts by day while his mind raced over the cipher symbols by night. Each new decoded page of Sir Alfred's diary revealed more of the Phoenix Fund, a complex financial instrument designed to transfer wealth from a seemingly failed enterprise to a new, secret beneficiary upon the fulfillment of certain conditions. The anchor was the key. It represented a legal firm, Anchor and Rook, the administrators of the scheme. And the girl was the linchpin.
He had to see.
He had to know she was real. St. Agnes's was a grim, soot-blackened brick edifice near Clerkenwell, its high walls promising more of a prison than a refuge. Elias, with no plausible reason to enter, took up a post across the street, pretending to read a newspaper. He watched the comings and goings, grim-faced nurses, tradesmen, a parson with a benevolent smile that didn't reach his eyes. On the second day of his vigil, he saw her. A group of older girls, all in identical drab gray dresses, were being shepherded on a walk. And one stood apart. She was perhaps 17, with hair the color of dark honey and a posture of unnatural, weary grace. While the others giggled or shuffled, she walked with her head slightly bowed, as if listening to a distant song. Her face, pale and fine-boned, held a quiet intelligence that the institutional uniform couldn't erase. Isabella. It had to be. His observation was cut short by a sharp tap on his shoulder. He spun around to find himself staring at the stained waistcoat of a large, red-faced man with the unmistakable air of authority, a beadle or a hospital governor.
You.
Loitering with intent, is it? The man grunted, his breath smelling of onions and porter. I've seen you 2 days running. Eyeing the girls. We have a place for your sort at Coldbath Fields. Panic seized Elias. A scene here would draw attention, and attention was the one thing he could not afford. Mr. Wheeler's warning echoed in his ears. No, sir, I assure you. I was merely— Spare me. Move along, or I'll call the constable. As Elias retreated, defeated, a low, melodic voice spoke from a nearby alley mouth. He's not wrong to be careful. Walls have eyes, and some of them are blind but see more than most. In the shadows leaned a ragged figure, a clay pipe clamped in a toothless mouth. His milky, unseeing eyes seemed to look straight through Elias. It was Blind Bill, a fixture of this and a dozen other crossroads, known for his cryptic pronouncements. What do you mean? Elias asked, his heart still hammering. The bird in the gilded cage, Blind Bill murmured, more to himself than to Elias. They feed her poetry and mirrors to keep her from asking for keys. But the lock is rusting. The man with the spider hands knows. And the other one, the bird stuffer, he's looking for a particular songbird too. A dead one that sings. A chill that had nothing to do with the fog crept down Elias's spine. Spider hands. Bird stuffer. The descriptions were too apartment Wheeler. And who is the bird stuffer? Professor Clay? How did this beggar know these things?
Who are you talking about?
What should I do? Elias hissed, pressing a halfpenny into the man's grimy hand. Blind Bill's fingers closed over the coin. Follow the music. The dead don't keep diaries, but their pets sometimes do. With that, he shuffled off into the gloom, leaving Elias more confused and terrified than before. The phrase, dead one that sings, gnawed at him. That night, decoding another section of the diary, he found a reference that made his blood run cold. Sir Alfred wrote of his only true friend, a reclusive ornithologist and inventor named Mordred Clay, who had built a magnificent automaton songbird for Alfred's daughter. The daughter had died in childhood. The automaton was buried with her in the family crypt. The diary's tone shifted here, becoming tinged with paranoia. Clay asked too many questions about the fund after her death. He knows the anchor's bite. I fear his curiosity is a canker. Elias now had two mysteries, a living heir in a foundling hospital and a dead child's tomb that might hold a mechanical clue. And two dangerous men were interested in both: Wheeler, who employed him, and Clay, who was searching independently. He was walking a tightrope between them. Driven by a need to understand the full scope of the conspiracy, Elias made a reckless decision. He would visit Anchor and Rook, the legal firm mentioned as the anchor in the cipher. Posing as a clerk from a fictional solicitor with a query about a legacy, a story he practiced until it felt hollow, he entered their prestigious offices in Lincoln's Inn. The clerk who received him was a young, pinched-faced man named Peel. Upon hearing the fabricated name Fairhaven mentioned in connection with a minor query, Peel's demeanor changed instantly. A mask of professional politeness slipped over sheer, undisguised alarm. That matter is closed. Archival. I am afraid no information can be divulged without written authority from the principal trustee, Peel said, his voice tight. And who would that be? Elias pressed, feigning innocent bureaucracy. That is confidential. Good day, sir. Peel stood, effectively dismissing him. But as Elias turned to leave, defeated, Peel added, almost in a whisper, "You should not dig in churchyards. The ground is consecrated, but what lies beneath is often unsettled." It was a warning. As Elias left the building, he glanced back. Through the first-floor window, he saw Peel in heated conversation with a tall, severe-looking man in a black coat, a man who watched Elias's retreating figure with cold, calculating eyes. Elias had stirred the nest. That evening, as he returned to his lodgings, the sense of being watched was a palpable pressure between his shoulder blades. He took a circuitous route, losing himself in the crowds of Covent Garden. When he finally slipped into the relative safety of his alley, he found his door was ajar. The lock was splintered. Hard in his throat, he pushed it open. His room had been searched with a violent, methodical precision. His mattress was slit, his few possessions scattered. But the searchers had been looking for something specific. They had ignored his father's crate of books, which lay untouched. Except for one thing. The leather-bound diary of Sir Alfred Fairhaven, which he had hidden beneath a loose floorboard, was gone. In its place, resting neatly on the stripped bed, was a single, long, black feather. And pinned to it with a sharp, brass pin, a tiny, carefully folded note. He opened it with trembling hands. A copyist should make copies. You have the original in your mind. Deliver the transcription. The clock ticks. The phoenix is stirring. Do not visit places you are not invited. Your next payment awaits at the usual place. Remember the debt. It was not signed. It didn't need to be. Wheeler knew. Wheeler had always known. The theft of the diary was a message. Elias was now the sole repository of its dangerous secrets. He was both invaluable and utterly disposable. The game had escalated. He was no longer an archivist, but a player on a board where the squares were graves and gilded cages, and the other pieces were moving in the shadows around him. Episode 3. The Songbird in the Crypt. The loss of the physical diary made Elias's task terrifyingly pure. The cipher, the revelations, the conspiracy, they now existed only in the vault of his memory. He was a living ledger, and Wheeler owned the debt on its contents. The black feather was a promise. One misstep, and he would be plucked as easily. He worked feverishly, transcribing the decoded entries from memory onto fresh paper. The story of the Phoenix Fund grew clearer. It was a masterpiece of legal chicanery, designed to funnel the vast Fairhaven fortune, built on plantations and railways, into a trust. The stated beneficiary was the rightful heir, but the definitions were malleable. Sir Alfred, Consumed by grief after his daughter's death and suspicious of his distant relatives, had created a labyrinthine will. The true key to unlocking the fortune lay not in a single document, but in a set of interlocking proofs: the identity of the heir, a token of legitimacy, the Phoenix seal, and a final, witnessed activation clause to be performed at a specific location. The diary hinted that Clay, in his grief, might have hidden part of the puzzle with his dead goddaughter. Isabella, the girl in St. Agnes's, was almost certainly the rightful heir, a fact concealed by the conspirators at Anchor and Rook. But without the seal and the final ritual, her claim was heir. And someone, Wheeler, or the severe man from the window, was ensuring she remained in the dark, a captive princess in a gray woolen castle. Following Blind Bill's cryptic advice to follow the music, Elias knew he had to find Mordred Clay. He ventured into the warren of streets around Seven Dials, asking discreet questions about a bird stuffer or a professor of mechanics. He was met with suspicion, closed doors, and once, a threat from a hulking rat catcher who told him to stop sniffing where the air was bad. Finally, a sympathetic old clockmaker, whose shop was a cave of ticking ghosts, pointed him down a crooked lane. He calls himself Clay. Has a workshop in the old livery stable. Minds his own business. But the sounds at night, not natural. Like tiny bones clicking. The workshop was a cathedral of the macabre. The sign above the door read M. Clay, Preserver of Curiosities. In the window, a stuffed fox perpetually pounced on a glass-eyed duck. Behind it, Elias could see the glint of brass and the shadow of larger, stranger forms. He took a deep breath and entered. The air was thick with the smell of camphor, sawdust, ozone, and something sweetly chemical. The space was a glorious chaos. Cabinets lined the walls, displaying hundreds of exquisitely preserved birds. In the center of the room, half-assembled automatas sat on workbenches, a monkey with cymbals, a dancing bear with jeweled eyes. And at the far end, bent over a complex brass mechanism, was Mordred Clay. He was not what Elias expected. He was a small, wiry man in his 50s, with wild gray hair and spectacles perched on his nose. His fingers, stained with oil and acid, moved with the delicate precision of a surgeon. He looked up, and his eyes were not mad, but profoundly, intensely sad. "Shop is closed to casual browsers," Clay said, his voice surprisingly soft. "If you've brought a pet for preservation, the rates are on the door." "I haven't," Elias said, his mouth dry. "I've come about a bird that doesn't breathe. One you made for a child. For Sophia Fairhaven." The effect was electric. Clay's hands froze. The sadness in his eyes hardened into something sharp and dangerous. He put down his tools slowly. "Who are you?" "My name is Elias Vine. I know about the Phoenix Fund, about the conspiracy against the heir. I believe you were a friend to Sir Alfred. I think you might be the only one who knows the whole truth." Clay studied him for a long, silent minute. He walked to the door, turned the lock, and pulled down a blind. "You have just spoken words that could get us both killed, young man."
How do you know this?
Elias told him a half-truth. He said he was a legal researcher who had stumbled upon inconsistencies in the Fairhaven estate papers, leading him to the diary cipher and to Clay himself. He mentioned the girl at St. Agnes's, but not Wheeler. He spoke of the anchor and the missing seal. Clay listened, pacing among his mechanical creations. "Alfred was a good man, but broken by loss," he said finally. "He created the fund to protect his legacy from the vultures in his family, and from the professional vultures at Anchor and Rook. He trusted me with a part of it, the sentimental part." He gestured to a small, ornate strongbox on a shelf. "The Phoenix seal is not a stamp. It is a key. A literal, mechanical key. And it is not here. Where is it? Where all things precious to Alfred went, Clay said, his voice dropping to a whisper. With Sophia. In her tomb. The automaton bird, it was her favorite thing. In its chest, wound next to the mainspring, is the key. Alfred's idea. The heart of the phoenix is with my songbird, he said. A poetic fool. Elias felt a surge of grim triumph. He had found it. We must retrieve it. To help Isabella claim her birthright. Clay's face darkened. We? There is no we. You do not understand the forces arrayed against this. I have been watched for years. The man at Anchor and Rook, a solicitor named Gromit, is a viper. And there is another, a shadow, who moves behind Gromit. A financier of some kind, they say. He has been buying up all the peripheral debts of the Fairhaven estate, consolidating his grip. He wants the fund to fail, to swallow the entire fortune in legal costs before it can be claimed. Retrieving the key would be an act of war. And leaving an innocent girl in a foundling hospital while her fortune is stolen is an act of cowardice, Elias retorted, surprising himself with his own passion. Clay stared at him, then a faint, grim smile touched his lips. You have a bit of Alfred in you. Reckless idealism.
He sighed.
The tomb is in the crypt of St. Dunstan East. It is watched. Gromit's men patrol. And the lock is unique, of my own design, to deter body snatchers. You cannot open it without me. A pact was forged in that dusty workshop, amid the watching glass eyes of 100 dead birds. They would go to the crypt together, at midnight in 2 nights' time. Clay would provide the tools and the knowledge of the lock. Elias would provide the distraction, his anonymity and his knowledge of the diary's contents, should they be caught. As Elias left, Clay called after him, his voice low. Mr. Vine. This shadow behind Gromit, he is said to have a voice like dry leaves. He is said to own men's souls through paper debts. Be careful who you owe. The description struck Elias like a blow. A voice like dry leaves. Spider hands. Wheeler. The pieces slammed together. Wheeler wasn't just a mysterious employer. He was the financier, the ultimate architect trying to orchestrate the fund's failure from the shadows. And Elias was working for him, even as he plotted against him. He was a double agent in a play where he didn't know any of the lines. Episode 4. A Pact in the Graveyard. The 2 days before the crypt expedition were an agony of suspended terror. Elias delivered the latest batch of transcriptions to the empty office on Threadneedle Walk, leaving them on the desk. He half expected Wheeler's silken voice to slither from the shadows, demanding to know why his copyist was consorting with a bird stuffer. But there was only silence, more oppressive than any interrogation. He avoided his usual haunts, certain he was being followed. The figure of the severe man from Anchor and Rook, Gromit, as Clay had named him, seemed to materialize at the edge of his vision on crowded streets, only to vanish. The city itself felt like a cage whose bars were closing in. On the appointed night, a cold, clinging fog slithered up from the Thames, wrapping the city in a perfect, concealing shroud. Elias met Clay at a prearranged tavern near the monument. The professor carried a large carpet bag that clinked softly with metal tools. The watchman at St. Dunstan's is in Gromit's pocket, Clay whispered over a pot of ale they didn't drink. But he is also in the pocket of the gin shopkeeper. By now, he should be thoroughly incapacitated. We have an hour, perhaps less. They moved through the fog like 2 shades. The church, its gardens a famous haven in the day, was a Gothic jungle at night, the skeletal trees clawing at the murky sky. The entrance to the crypt was a low, iron-bound door on the south side. As predicted, the watchman's lodge was dark, the sound of stuporous snoring emanating from within. Clay produced a set of intricate, custom-made lockpicks from his bag. "My own design," he muttered, kneeling before the heavy lock. "The man who can pick this does not exist." His skilled hands worked with a mesmerizing deftness. After a tense minute, there was a solid clunk. The door groaned open on rusted hinges, exhaling a breath of cold, damp air that smelled of earth and old stone. They lit dark lanterns. The shutters opened to a slit. The crypt was a forest of stone and leaden coffins, stacked in alcoves and lining the passages. The Fairhaven vault was at the far end, a small, wrought iron gate sealing a recess where a single, white marble sarcophagus lay. The inscription was simple: Sophia Fairhaven, beloved child, taken too soon. The gate lock was, as Clay had said, a bizarre mechanical puzzle of rotating rings and sliding plates. "Stand back," Clay instructed. He didn't pick it. He played it, turning the rings to specific, marked positions that corresponded, Elias realized with a start, to constellations, the same symbols from the diary's cipher. With a final, soft click, the gate swung open. The sarcophagus lid was immense. "Help me," Clay grunted. Putting their shoulders to it, they heaved. The stone moved with a grating scream that echoed horrifically through the silent crypt. They froze, hearts pounding, listening for any sound from above. Only the drip of distant water answered. Inside the coffin, nestled on faded velvet, were the small, sad bones of a child. And resting on the tiny ribcage, gleaming in the lantern light, was the automaton. It was a thing of heartbreaking beauty, a life-sized nightingale crafted from silver, brass, and enamel, with tiny, perfect feathers of etched metal. For a moment, both men were struck silent by the poignant violation of the scene. Clay reached in, his hands trembling now not with cold but with emotion. "Forgive me, little one," he whispered. With a craftsman's touch, he found a nearly invisible seam on the bird's breast. Using a fine tool from his waistcoat, he pressed, and a small plate sprang open. Inside, amid a nest of miniature gears and springs, lay a slender key of burnished gold, shaped like a rising phoenix with outspread wings. As Clay's fingers closed around it, a new voice, cold and sharp as a guillotine blade, sliced through the crypt silence. "I knew sentimental folly would bring you here, Clay. And you've brought me a bonus." They spun around. Framed in the crypt entrance, holding a bullseye lantern that blinded them, stood Gromit. The severe solicitor was not alone. Two hulking figures flanked him, cudgels in hand. And behind them, almost lost in the deeper shadow, was a smaller, leaner man. Elias couldn't see his face, but he saw the pale, long-fingered hands resting calmly on the head of a walking cane. "Wheeler." "The key, if you please, Professor," Gromit said, stepping forward. "And the transcriptionist." "My associate is most displeased with your extracurricular research, Mr. Vine." Clay clutched the key to his chest. "It belongs to the heir, Gromit. You've perverted the law long enough. The law is a tool, and I am its master craftsman," Gromit sneered. "Take them." The two brutes advanced. Elias, acting on pure instinct, did the only thing he could think of. He snatched the automaton nightingale from the coffin and raised it high. "Stop, or I dash it to pieces." "How will you explain its destruction to your associate when he wants the whole set?" He was bluffing, aiming his threat at the shadow behind Gromit. It worked. A silken whisper floated from the darkness. "Hold." The thugs paused. Wheeler stepped into the circle of light. He wore a heavy, hooded cloak, but his lower face was visible, thin lips set in a line of mild annoyance. "Mr. Vine, you have a frustrating habit of exceeding your brief. The key and the bird.
Now."
Your debt will be considered paid in full. A generous offer." The girl at St. Agnes's goes free, Elias said, his voice shaking but clear, with a document from Anchor and Rook acknowledging her as the Fairhaven heir. You will cease all claims against the Phoenix Fund. Gromit laughed, a harsh bark. Preposterous. Wheeler was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound like a grave opening. You are in a crypt, boy. You are outnumbered. You have no leverage. I have the only copy of Sir Alfred's decoded diary in my head. Elias shot back, the plan forming even as he spoke. You burn the original. If I don't walk out of here, a sealed letter detailing the entire conspiracy, including your names and methods, goes to the Times, to the Lord Chancellor, and to every rival firm in Lincoln's Inn. I am a copyist. I've made copies. It was a desperate, glorious lie. He had told no one, but the seed of doubt was planted. Wheeler's eyes, glittering in the hood's shadow, fixed on him. The silence stretched, broken only by the dripping water. The standoff in the tomb was a perfect, grotesque metaphor for the whole affair. Fortune and death, leverage and fear, all trapped in a stone vault. A renegotiation, Wheeler said finally, his voice devoid of all emotion. Very well. A temporary truce. You may keep the bird for now, but the key comes with us, as insurance for your continued cooperation. The girl remains where she is. Any public revelation, and she will vanish into a much darker hole than St. Agnes's. Do we understand one another? It was a defeat disguised as a stalemate. They had the key, but they hadn't captured Elias or Clay. And Elias had, improbably, survived crossing his employer. Reluctantly, Clay handed over the golden phoenix key. Gromit snatched it with a triumphant smirk. Wheeler gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. We will speak again soon, Mr. Vine. The transcription is not yet complete, and our business is not concluded. The three figures retreated, melting back into the foggy night. Elias and Clay were left alone in the crypt, with an open tomb, a stolen automaton, and the crushing knowledge that the enemy now held the literal key to the fortune. But they were alive, and the game was still in play. As they fled the churchyard, the first chime of midnight echoing through the fog, Elias clutched the cold metal bird to his chest. It was not the key, but it was a symbol, and sometimes symbols were the only weapons the powerless had. Episode 5, The Gilded Cage's Key. The aftermath of the crypt was a cold, gray dawn of reckoning. Elias and Clay parted with a terse agreement to lay low and communicate only through the blind beggar, Bill, who seemed to be a neutral, if cryptic, conduit. The automaton bird now resided under Elias's floorboard, a cold, metallic secret. Elias returned to his garret, expecting it to be ransacked again or to find Wheeler waiting. Instead, he found a simple, sealed letter on his desk. The handwriting was the same elegant script as the first note in the library. Your initiative, while reckless, demonstrates resourcefulness. The transcription proceeds. The next subject is the final set of entries concerning the activation clause of the fund, where and how the heir must claim her birthright. Complete this, and your financial obligations to me will be forgiven. The girl's safety remains contingent on your silence and productivity. Do not seek out Clay again. He is a marked man.
Vous.
The message was clear. Wheeler was cutting his losses on the physical key, focusing instead on the final, crucial piece of information only Elias could provide. He was being herded towards the conclusion of his own betrayal. Haunted and cornered, Elias did the only thing that felt active. He had to see Isabella again, to know the human reality of the abstraction he was gambling with. Using a different disguise, an ill-fitting porter's smock, he took up a new post near St. Agnes's, this time by the small, walled garden where the inmates took their air. He didn't have to wait long. She emerged, a book in her hand, and sat on a solitary bench under a bare elm tree. She seemed even paler, a figure of quiet endurance. As he watched, a tall, thin woman in the severe dress of a matron approached her. Their conversation was inaudible, but the body language was unmistakable. The matron was delivering a reprimand. Isabella listened, head bowed, then nodded submissively. But as the matron turned to leave, Isabella looked up, and for a fleeting second, her expression was not one of defeat, but of fierce, blazing intelligence and resentment. It was the look of a prisoner studying the lock. Then the mask of placid melancholy slipped back into place. In that moment, Elias knew two things. She was no passive victim, and he had to make contact. Opportunity came in the form of a street urchin, a grimy-faced boy of about 10 chasing a hoop. Elias called him over with a penny. "See that young lady on the bench? The one with the book. When the matron goes inside, run to her and give her this. Say nothing. Then run." He scribbled a note on a scrap of paper, wrapped it around a second penny, and gave both to the boy. The note read, "A friend of your father's true friend seeks to help. Are you watched? If you can, walk to the gate at the northeast corner tomorrow at this same hour. Danger is everywhere. Trust no one from anchor and rook." He didn't sign it. He watched, heart hammering, as the boy darted across the lane, slipped through the garden gate, and delivered the package. Isabella started, looked at the boy, then swiftly palmed the note and coin. She didn't look around. She simply stood, smoothed her dress, and walked calmly back inside, the note undoubtedly already memorized and destroyed. The next day, filled with a nervous hope, Elias was at the northeast gate, a little-used service entrance. To his astonishment, she was there, ostensibly inspecting a patch of winter ivy on the wall. She didn't look at him, but her voice, low and clear, carried on the cold air. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows you are not who they say you are," Elias murmured, pretending to fix his boot. "Your name is not Jane Smith. You are Isabella Fairhaven. An inheritance was stolen from you." A sharp intake of breath. "Fairhaven. I dream of that name. They tell me it's a fever fancy." She risked a glance at him. Her eyes were a startling shade of gray-green, like sea glass. "What proof?" "The diary of Sir Alfred. A golden key shaped like a phoenix. An automaton nightingale." He saw the words strike home. The names meant something to her, fragments of a lost childhood fairy tale. "They have the key. I have the bird. But I need to know, do they speak to you? Does a man named Gromit, or a man with a very soft voice, ever visit?" "Gromit comes quarterly," she whispered, her face hardening. "He reviews my progress. He says he is the trustee of a small charitable fund for my upkeep. He is cruel in a quiet way. The other I have never seen. But sometimes when Gromit is here, I feel there is someone else listening from the next room." Wheeler. Elias's suspicion was confirmed. "They are keeping you poor and ignorant until they can dissolve the trust and take everything. There is a final step, a clause to activate the fund. Do you know anything about a specific place? A location mentioned in your childhood?" Isabella frowned, thinking. "A place. I have a memory, not of a place but of a rhyme. A nonsense rhyme my nurse sang. When the lion's stone mane drinks the moon's own tear, slash where the silent river meets the speaking stair, slash the phoenix rises for the rightful heir." I never understood it. I thought it was just a song. Elias's mind, the relentless copyist's engine, seized the words. They were not nonsense. They were directions. A riddle from Sir Alfred, a final puzzle for his heir. The lion's stone mane a statue? A drinking fountain? The silent river an underground stream? The speaking stare, the clues swirled in his head, more pieces of the cipher. I must go, Isabella said urgently, seeing a figure move at a window. They watch me closely. If you are true, help me get out. Not just for the money, for the air. I will, Elias promised, the weight of it settling on him. It was no longer an abstract historical puzzle. It was a promise to a living, breathing person. Memorize this. In 3 days' time, at midnight, be at this gate. Be ready to move. Tell no one. She gave a barely perceptible nod and glided away, back into the gloom of the institution. Elias's next move was his most dangerous yet. He had to find Clay against Wheeler's direct order. He needed the professor's knowledge of London's oddities to decipher the rhyme. Using Blind Bill as a messenger, he arranged a meeting at the one place Wheeler might not expect, the crowded, raucous, and anonymous pleasure gardens of Vauxhall, now open for a winter promenade. They met by a gaslit pagoda, the strains of a distant waltz masking their words. Elias told Clay of the meeting with Isabella and recited the rhyme. Clay's eyes lit up with the fire of a puzzle solver. The lion's stone mane, a drinking fountain with a lion's head. There is an old one from the Tudor era in the churchyard of St. Clement Danes. It's called the Lion's Conduit. The moon's own tear rainwater? No, too common. When the moon's reflection falls in the water basin at a specific angle, and the silent river meets the speaking stare? Elias pressed. Clay paced. The fleet. The river fleet. It was covered over, made into a sewer. A silent river now underground. It runs near there. A speaking stare, an echo? There is a set of steps leading down to an old water gate near Blackfriars. It has a peculiar acoustic. They call it Whispering Stairs. By God, Vine. I think it's a map. The activation site is where a line from the Lion Fountain's water at a specific lunar alignment points to the intersection of the buried fleet and those stairs. It was brilliant, mad, and perfectly in keeping with Sir Alfred's romantic, mechanical mind. They had the location. Now they needed the key, held by Wheeler and Gromit, the heir, imprisoned at St. Agnes's, and the precise time, dictated by the moon. They had 3 days to steal a key, kidnap an heiress, and perform a secret ritual under the noses of 2 ruthless, powerful enemies. The final act was upon them. The London Cipher was finally revealing its last, most dangerous line. Episode 6, The House of Cards. The plan was a house of cards built on a cliff's edge. 3 days to orchestrate an impossible heist, extract Isabella from her prison, snatch the Phoenix key from their enemies, and converge at the secret location dictated by the moon. Elias and Clay knew they couldn't act alone. They needed a distraction, eyes they didn't possess, and muscle they couldn't provide. Reluctantly, they turned to the one person who seemed to operate in the city's blind spots, Blind Bill. They found him at his usual crossing, but this time, Elias didn't offer a coin. He offered a proposition. You see things, Bill. You know the currents. We need to move a precious bird from a cage at St. Agnes's tomorrow at midnight. And we need a swarm to distract the cats. Blind Bill chewed on his pipe, his milky eyes seeming to gaze into a middle distance. Cats is easy. A dropped barrel of gin at the workhouse gate will draw every rat catcher and watchman for a quarter mile. But the big cat, the one with the spider hands, he don't watch the cage. He watches the watchers. You need a bigger noise. What noise? Clay asked, impatient. The noise of money, Bill said, a sly grin revealing blackened gums.
A rumor on change.
A whisper that Anchor and Rook is insolvent. Their biggest clients' funds vanished. That'll bring a mob of a different sort to Mr. Gromit's door. A mob in silk hats. Spider hands will have to go there to put out the fire. It was diabolically brilliant. A financial panic to divert Wheeler. Elias, using his copyist skills, could forge a convincing fragment of a damning ledger. Clay, with his knowledge of mechanics, could ensure a convincing accident with a gin barrel wagon near St. Agnes's. The plan was set. Day 1, Elias forges the document. Day 2, Clay arranges the accident with a disgruntled carter he knew. Blind Bill begins his whispered campaign in the taverns and coffee houses around Lombard Street. Day 3, midnight. The escape. Elias spent the first day in a fever of creation, using his memory of the diary's financial machinations to create a fake bank draft and a letter implying massive fraud at Anchor and Rook. He aged the paper with tea and soot, his hand perfectly mimicking the formal script of a chief clerk. On the evening of the second day, he delivered the final batch of transcriptions to Threadneedle Walk, the details of the activation clause and the deciphered rhyme. It was the ultimate betrayal, giving Wheeler the final piece of the puzzle. But it was also the bait. The note he left with it was brief. The heir knows the rhyme. She plans to attempt the clause at the Lion's Conduit at the next lunar alignment, 4 nights hence. She is desperate. It was a lie buying them a false date. As he placed the papers on the desk, the silken voice spoke from the darkness of a deep alcove, making Elias jump. Your work is almost complete, Mr. Vine. You have been more eventful than anticipated. Wheeler emerged, not as a shadow, but as a man. He was older than Elias imagined, with a face that was all sharp angles and parchment-dry skin. His eyes were the color of flint. The girl is stirring. Gromit reports unusual resolve in her. Did you inspire that? I transcribed a diary, sir, Elias said, keeping his eyes down. Nothing more. See that it remains nothing more. The key is secure. The location will be watched. When she makes her attempt, she will fail, and the fund will be forever voided. Your role will then be concluded. Handsomely. Wheeler's smile was a thin, bloodless line. Do not be at the conduit in 4 nights, Mr. Vine. It would be unhealthy. Elias left, cold with the certainty that Wheeler intended to clean the board after the final move. Isabella would vanish. He and Clay would be disposed of. The debt was not to be forgiven. It was to be erased. Midnight of the third day arrived. Wrapped in a freezing, clear fog, the moon, a sharp sliver, provided little light, perfect for their purposes. Elias waited, nerves stretched wire-tight, in the alley opposite the northeast gate of St. Agnes's. Clay was stationed 2 streets over with a hackney cab. Its driver paid handsomely for silence and speed. At midnight, the distant crash of shattering wood and a subsequent roar of voices echoed through the night. Clay's gin barrel distraction. Lights flared in the workhouse windows. Shouts and running feet converged on the sound. At the gate, a small, dark figure appeared. Isabella, dressed in a plain, dark cloak over her gray dress, her face a pale oval of determination. She slipped the bolt, which Clay had surreptitiously oiled and tampered with during the day, and darted across the street to Elias. No time, he hissed, grabbing her hand. They ran through the labyrinthine alleys, the sounds of chaos fading behind them. They found the cab, clambered inside, and Clay rapped on the roof. The cab lurched into motion. Is it done? The key? Isabella asked, breathless. Not yet, Clay said grimly. That's the next trick. And we have less than an hour before the moon is in position. Their destination was not the conduit, but a narrow lane backing onto the offices of Anchor and Rook. Blind Bill's financial rumor had worked. Even at this hour, a small, agitated crowd of well-dressed men milled outside the firm's door, demanding answers. Lights blazed from Gromit's office window. The spider had been drawn out. "Wait here," Clay instructed. From his bag, he produced the automaton nightingale. He wound a small key in its back. With a series of delicate clicks and whirs, the bird came to life. Its head turned, its wings fluttered once, and from its tiny brass beak issued a perfect, piercingly beautiful trill of song, the same song it had played for Sophia Fairhaven decades before. It was a sound of heartbreaking innocence. Clay handed the bird to Isabella. "You know what to do. We will be right behind you." Isabella, clutching the mechanical bird, walked with regal calm towards the commotion. She pushed through the crowd of bewildered merchants and, as Gromit appeared at the door, red-faced and shouting, she stepped forward and held up the singing bird. The effect was instantaneous. Gromit's face went from red to corpse white. He staggered back as if struck. That's impossible. It was buried." "It was my father's," Isabella announced, her voice clear and cutting through the babble. "Sir Alfred Fairhaven. And you, sir, are a thief. I have come for what is mine. I have come for the Phoenix Key." The crowd fell into a stunned silence. This was a far better drama than Financial Rumors. A lost heiress. A singing bird from a tomb. Gromit, panicking, looked around wildly for Wheeler, for his thugs, but found only the avid, scandalized faces of his clients. Seizing the moment of chaos, Elias and Clay slipped down the side alley to the office's rear entrance. Using Clay's tools, they picked the simple lock in seconds. They knew where the key would be. In Gromit's personal safe, the combination to which Elias had deduced from an offhand mention in the diary, Sir Alfred's dead daughter's birthday. In 2 minutes they were in. In 3, the safe was open. There, on a velvet cushion, lay the golden Phoenix Key. Clay snatched it. As they turned to leave, a figure filled the doorway. Not Gromit. Not a thug. Wheeler. He held a small, elegant pistol, its barrel unwavering. The copyist and the craftsman. "I should have known the rat would return to the nest with the bird. The key, please, Professor." Outside, they could hear Isabella's voice rising in defiance, the crowd murmuring. The two dramas were about to collide. Episode 7. At the Speaking Stair. The back office of Anchor and Rook was a tomb of ledgers, the air thick with the smell of dust and desperation. Wheeler's pistol was a tiny, dark eye staring at Clay's heart. "The key," Wheeler repeated, his dry voice barely a whisper. "You have played your parts admirably. The forgery, the rumor, the theatrical appearance of the girl, it has flushed every player into the open. Efficient. Now the finale." Elias's mind raced. Outside, Isabella was holding a crowd. Here, they were trapped. "You'll never get away with shooting us." The noise. "This alley hears worse every night," Wheeler interrupted. "And Mr. Gromit will discover 2 burglars shot while robbing his safe. A tragedy. The hysterical girl's claims will be dismissed. The fund, lacking the key and with its heir discredited, will be dissolved by the courts tomorrow. My consortium will collect the remnants. A clean end." Clay's hand tightened around the key. "You are a canker, Wheeler. You turn living legacies into dead capital." "I turn chaos into order," Wheeler corrected.
Now.
A thunderous crash shook the front of the building, followed by a roar from the crowd and the distinct sound of splintering wood. The mob, energized by Isabella's performance and Gromit's panic, was pushing inside. In that split second of distraction, Elias acted. He didn't charge Wheeler. He threw himself at a high shelf of heavy legal folios next to the door. The shelf teetered and fell with a deafening crash directly towards Wheeler. The financier flinched, firing his pistol. The shot went wide, embedding itself in a ledger with a thump. Clay lunged, not at Wheeler, but past him, into the chaotic main office. Elias scrambled after him. The scene before them was pandemonium. The front door was off its hinges. Gromit was trying to shield himself behind his desk from the advancing, excited crowd. Isabella stood tall in the center, the singing automaton held aloft like a talisman. "There," Elias shouted, pointing to Clay. "He has the key, the true key." All eyes turned to Clay, who held the golden phoenix key aloft. It caught the gaslight and blazed. A collective gasp went up. Wheeler emerged from the back room, his composure shattered, his coat dusty. "She is an imposter. That man is a thief. Arrest them." But the authority had drained from his voice. The narrative had slipped from his grasp. "The law will decide," cried a stout merchant in the crowd. "But not here. At the place the rhyme dictates. Let's see the proof with our own eyes." The mob, now a makeshift jury, seized upon the idea. It was too delicious, too novel. They wouldn't let this end in a solicitor's office. They wanted the final act. Elias, Clay, and Isabella were swept out of the office, not as prisoners, but as the central figures in a bizarre, public procession. Wheeler and a frantic Gromit were forced to follow, trapped by the momentum of the crowd. The whole group, dozen strong, moved like a turbulent river through the midnight streets towards the Lion's Conduit and the Whispering Stairs. The night was freezing, the moon a cold sliver in the sky. At the ancient lion-headed fountain in the churchyard of St. Clement Danes, they stopped. The lion's stone mane was dry. "The moon's own tear," Isabella said, her voice clear in the hush. She looked at the sliver of moon. "It is not rain. It is the moonlight itself. When the moon's reflection falls in the basin." They waited, the crowd holding its breath. Slowly, as the moon climbed, its pale light spilled over the rim of the stone basin and touched the water within. A silver sliver, a tear, appeared in the water.
"Now," Clay said.
The line from the tear, through the lion's eye. He sighted along an imaginary line from the reflection, past a specific ship in the lion's stone eye. It pointed like an arrow down a narrow, descending lane towards the Thames. The procession moved again, a silent, determined torrent. They reached a forgotten set of mossy steps leading down to the buried river Fleet, the silent river. This was the Whispering Stair, a word spoken at the top carried with uncanny clarity to the bottom, where a brick archway marked the old Watergate. At the base of the stairs, before the black maw of the buried river, Isabella turned. The crowd gathered above, lining the steps and the lane, a hushed amphitheater. Wheeler and Gromit stood to the side, faces grim, surrounded now not by allies but by witnesses. Clay handed Isabella the phoenix key. From her cloak, she drew the automaton bird. Its song had wound down to silence. "The rhyme ends," she declared, her voice echoing strangely on the speaking stair, carried to every ear. "The phoenix rises for the rightful heir." She took the golden key and, instead of inserting it into anything, she pressed it against a hidden slot on the automaton's breast, next to the winder. She turned it. There was a loud, definitive click from within the bird's mechanism. Then, she raised the bird and brought it down sharply on a specific, flat stone at her feet. The ceramic base of the automaton shattered. Inside, among the gears, was not just machinery. Nestled there was a final, tightly coiled scroll of vellum. The true phoenix seal was not the key. The key was merely the activator for this, the final document, Sir Alfred's last codicil, hidden in the heart of his daughter's favorite toy for decades. With trembling hands, Isabella unrolled it. She read aloud, her voice ringing in the cold air. I, Sir Alfred Fairhaven, being of sound mind, do hereby decree that whoever bears this seal, having proven their lineage and dedication by solving the cipher of my heart, and who activates this document at the place of the silent river and speaking stair, is my true and sole heir. All conditions of the Phoenix Fund are hereby met. All powers granted to anchor and rook are void. Let my fortune rise from the ashes for them, and them alone. It was done. The public ritual, the witnesses, the production of the sealed document. It was irrefutable. A cheer erupted from the crowd, a roar of satisfaction at justice theatrically served. Wheeler's face was a mask of pure, impotent fury. He had been outmaneuvered, not in the shadows where he ruled, but in the blazing light of public spectacle. He turned to melt away into the night, but a hand fell on his shoulder. It was the stout merchant, flanked by two others. I think not, sir. I believe the Lord Chancellor and the police will have questions for you and Mr. Gromit about conspiracy and fraud. We shall all be witnesses. As Wheeler and Gromit were seized by the will of the crowd, Elias finally looked at Isabella. The mask of the melancholy orphan was gone, burned away in the phoenix fire of the revelation. She stood straight, the heiress not just to a fortune, but to her own destiny. Her eyes met Elias's across the steps. She gave him a small, solemn nod of thanks. It was not an end, but a beginning. Episode 8. The Unwritten Ledger. The fallout was swift and satisfyingly public. The affair of the singing bird was the sensation of London. Wheeler, whose real name was revealed to be a disgraced Scottish financier named Alistair Welk, and Gromit were charged with conspiracy, fraud, and attempted coercion. Their web of influence evaporated in the light of scandal. Isabella Fairhaven, with Clay and Elias as her chief witnesses and advisors, was formally recognized as the heir. The fortune was immense, but so were the responsibilities and the scars. A month after the night at the speaking stair, Elias found himself in the library of the now-reclaimed Fairhaven House in Bloomsbury. The room was vast, sunny, and smelled of beeswax and old paper. Isabella sat behind a large desk, no longer in gray wool, but in a simple dress of deep green. I cannot repay you, Mr. Vine, she said. Not with money. That would be an insult. I don't want money, Elias said, and realized it was true. I wanted the story to be right, the record to be correct. Then let me offer you a post, she said. The estate is a labyrinth of papers, decades of mismanagement and deliberate obfuscation. I need an archivist with an impeccable memory and a talent for seeing truth in ink. A keeper of the ledgers, to help me build something real from the ashes. Not just a fortune, but schools, hospitals, perhaps a new kind of foundling home. It was the perfect offer, a purpose that used his gift without exploiting his need. He accepted. Professor Mordred Clay, cleared of any suspicion, found his workshop patronized by the new lady of the Fairhaven fortune. She commissioned him not for toys, but for designs, for clean water pumps, for better ventilation in workhouses, for mechanical aids for the blind. His genius was finally turned towards life. Elias moved into a small, comfortable apartment within the Fairhaven estate. His first task was sorting through the mountain of papers from anchor and rook. One afternoon, he found a slim, private ledger. It was Wheeler's. Not of finances, but of assets, names, debts, secrets bought and sold. Elias's own name was there, with a single, chilling notation. Copyist. Mnemonic. Debt. Garrett rent to Shrike. Value. High unique. Disposition. To be liquidated post-Fairhaven. He closed the book, a cold shiver finally releasing. He had been an entry in a ledger, marked for deletion. Now he was the archivist. That evening he took a walk. His feet, out of old habit, carried him towards his former slum in Cheapside. As he passed the mouth of a familiar alley, a low, melodic voice called out, "The ledger's balanced, then? The bird sings free?" It was Blind Bill, leaning in his usual spot, a fresh clay pipe in his mouth. "It is," Elias said, placing a golden sovereign, not a halfpenny, into the man's outstretched hand. "We couldn't have done it without your distractions." Blind Bill's fingers closed over the coin. He brought it to his ear and smiled. "A good wait. But the city's full of new ciphers, Mr. Vine. New cages, new keys. The music never really stops." He was right. As Elias walked back towards Bloomsbury, the city's vast, intricate, painful, and beautiful machine thrummed around him. He had decoded one secret, but London herself was the ultimate, unsolvable cipher. And for the first time, he looked at its teeming, chaotic pages not with fear, but with a sense of belonging. He was no longer a passive copyist of other men's lies. He was a scribe of his own story, and perhaps a guardian of others.
The end.